You can't focus. You can't finish tasks. You start 10 things and finish none. You also feel like you're pulled in multiple different directions. You may even lack motivation to go and do stuff. Do you find yourself defaulting to scrolling on your phone or cheap things to keep your motivation alive, stuff that isn't good for you? You might use alcohol or stimulants or something along those lines just to keep you going. Look, it's not your discipline. Your discipline isn't the problem. There is a hormone that is working against you. So, welcome to Longevity Masters. I'm your host, Grant Hutchby, and this show was built for male entrepreneurs to reverse their biological age and claim back time that they would have never had otherwise, because I fundamentally believe that longevity is the highest form of providing. And this goes towards my longer term mission of helping 1,000 male entrepreneurs reverse their biological age by 10 years. That's 10,000 years of prime time given back so that you can provide for your loved ones at the highest possible level. And today, my friends, we are diving into the first section of clean, which is part of the filled process. So it's the first section of clean. It is also the beginning of the neurological rhythm. So we've just done the fixed cycle, which included the circadian rhythm and the metabolic rhythm. And now we're moving on to a whole new cycle and a whole new rhythm. And this is one of my favorite hormones, which is dopamine. So a lot of people think that dopamine is the pleasure hormone or the hormone that makes you feel good, where it's not really. It's the driver hormone. It's the hormone that makes you want to do something. It's the motivation to go towards something as opposed to the pleasure of doing that thing. So dopamine is really important to your drive, your determination, your get up and go. It activates when you believe that you're going to receive pleasure. So it makes you do something because you believe you're going to get pleasure from it. Now, this can be done in a very destructive way. This can also be done in a very, very constructive way. And we'll talk about those two things in a minute. But what I wanted to start with was a little bit of how I discovered dopamine as both a negative and a positive driver. So in my life, I grew up with technology, with mobile phones, with screens. I was the first generation of people, teenagers, that had mobile phones. I got my first phone when I was 14 years old. I started working in the mobile phone industry when I was 16 years old. So I've been around mobile phones for a very long time, and they have been a massive, massive driver of dopamine. That anticipation you get of when you get a notification, or what did I get? Who has messaged me? Or what am I going to see on social media today? That all drives your dopamine because we believe that we're going to get pleasure from the device, from looking at whatever it is we have perceived as giving us pleasure. So I've grown up with that, and I've fallen in and out of this trap multiple times over the years. And it wasn't until I identified it as my need for dopamine that I realized exactly how I could control it and what I was doing. So, like I said, dopamine is the pursuit of pleasure, not the pleasure itself. So it gets released before you do the thing, because it's your motivation to go and do the thing. So the dopamine is released before you actually do it because it motivates you to do it. So we get dopamine from loads of different places. Obviously, screens, devices, things like that. That's a negative way of getting it. Another negative way I used to get dopamine was through stimulants. So all throughout my life, when I was younger, there was drugs involved, and you can get a massive amount of dopamine, illegal drugs that you take. You also get dopamine from caffeine, get dopamine from alcohol, and a lot of these destructive ways give you easy dopamine hits. Now, this is what I mean about negative ways to get dopamine. Usually, not all the time, but usually the negative way to get dopamine are the easy routes to get dopamine. Take something, the anticipation of the high that you're going to get from something that you take, alcohol, drugs, caffeine, whatever that might be, that's a quick hit. The anticipation of pleasure that you get from going on your phone, again, a quick hit. However, once I identified this, and I identified that dopamine is the anticipation of pleasure. So therefore, it motivates you to go and do the thing because you anticipate that you're going to get pleasure from it. Hence, the pursuit of pleasure, not pleasure itself. What I started to do was assign pleasure within my body and the triggers that I get for pleasure within my body for real positive things. So let me give you two examples of where I've done this. So as an example, going to the gym. If we associate the gym, or I used to, sometimes associated the gym with hard work and it's going to be tough and I'm not going to enjoy it, you don't get much dopamine release from that. However, if you change and rewire your brain like I did to think, when I go to the gym afterwards, I'm going to feel amazing. And then my body is going to adapt to what I've done in the gym. And therefore I'm going to grow as a person. And that's going to be even better than getting a quick fix of drugs, alcohol, or a phone doom scroll. So I've assigned in my head and in my nervous system a pleasure to going to the gym. So now when I think about the gym, I get a slight dopamine hit, which motivates me to pursue that pleasure. And that's where dopamine comes from. That's one example. Another example is big, tough tasks that require a lot of brain power to do. So we could say to ourselves, or I used to say to myself, that these tough tasks are really tough. I don't want to do them. They're going to take a long time and they're going to require a lot of my energy. That does not help with the release of dopamine. That does not motivate me to want me to do the task. So when I found about this dopamine connection, I then rewired my brain to say, well, when I get this task done, not only am I going to get the benefit of completing the task, but I'm also going to get the brain space and the satisfaction of knowing that this massive thing is off my list. Now that is a massive pursuit of pleasure because I'm pursuing the pleasure of what it's going to be like once the task is done. Not just the result of doing the task, but the result of the fact that I don't have to do it anymore. And that to me is a lot of pleasure and a lot of brain space. And I rewired my brain in that way. So if your brain is currently wired to think, I don't want to do these tough tasks, or I don't want to go to the gym, if we rewire our brains to think about the benefits, the positives, and the actual pleasure that you're going to get from doing these tough things, then that will start the release of dopamine when you need to do them. So if you know that a tough task needs to be done and you start thinking, oh, right, yeah, if I get that done, then this will happen and it'll be off my plate. that's going to start the release of dopamine and therefore make you pursue it, make you motivated to do it more. So they're just a couple of examples of how I've gone through my life and the transitioning, I guess, from the quick fixes of dopamine through screens, stimulants, quick fixes to more harder tasks that afterwards are going to give me a pleasure rather than the doing of it. So remember, it's not the doing of something that gives you the dopamine anyways. Dopamine gets released before you do the task. So hopefully that's described from my own experience what dopamine does and how you can use it in a positive way. Now what I want to do is debunk some myths about dopamine. So like I said, dopamine is not a pleasure hormone. It's a pursuit hormone. So dopamine is a very powerful signal. Dopamine signals where you're going to get pleasure from or where you anticipate that you're going to get pleasure from. And that's important, is anticipation of pleasure does not necessarily mean you're going to get pleasure from it. So it's like someone that loves going on social media. They think they're going to get pleasure from it, but then when they actually do it, they don't get as much pleasure as what they thought, and then it's short-lived. So you get a spike of dopamine and then not much satisfaction. What we're looking for here is a good spike of dopamine, and then you actually get the pleasure that you are anticipating that you are going to get. And that's the problem with addictions, especially drugs. And I would consider social media and doom scrolling, I would consider that a drug these days because people are addicted to it. And what tends to happen is you think that you're going to get a certain feeling from it, but you don't actually get it. And what we need to start doing, like I've done in the past, is reframing what you get pleasure from and what you don't. So I've now linked pleasure to completing hard tasks, to going to the gym, to having saunas, having ice baths. And I don't know if you know, but while ice baths isn't part of this section of the turn back time machine, because we're in the clean section and the neurological rhythm, ice baths do have a massive impact on dopamine levels, and they're sustained dopamine levels over a period of time as well. So that was just a point on ice baths. But the point I'm talking about is reframing things that you do that have a negative impact and that have a positive impact. So the things that have a negative impact, you want them to feel negative. You don't want your brain and your body to feel like you're getting something positive from them. Even though there is an element of pleasure and you know that it's a quick fix, jumping on your phone, having a beer, eating some comfort food, whatever that might be, that will produce a hit of dopamine before you do it. And then you do it and the dopamine goes away very, very quickly. What you want is to assign pleasure to the things that are going to be beneficial for you. So like going on a walk in nature, going to the gym, completing hard tasks like I've mentioned before, doing meditation, going in the sauna, having an ice bath. Like I said, we've just mentioned a load of them, but there are loads of positive acts that you can do, things that you can do that if you reframe your brain, not only will it be able to give you that hit of dopamine, which is your motivation to go and do it, but it has a positive impact on your life afterwards. So meditation has a positive impact, going for a walk, positive impact, completing a hard task, positive impact, going to the gym, obviously positive impact. Whereas the easy quick fix dopamines with drugs, alcohol, quick fixes like scrolling on your phone, whatever that might be, Netflix binges, they're all easier to do, which is why they give a quite easy spike of dopamine, but they don't give as much lasting pleasure as the other things. So I think that's a really good way to differentiate it. What you want to try and do is have almost a slight delayed but lasting amount of pleasure rather than an instant, quickly fading amount of pleasure. So hopefully that gives you a really easy way of identifying whether the thing that is giving you your dopamine hit or your drive to go and do it is motivated by a slight delayed amount of pleasure, but much longer lasting pleasure, or is it an instant amount of pleasure that doesn't last very long? This whole concept of delayed gratification works amazingly with dopamine. So if you can get neurologically wired so that you get pleasure from delaying the gratification of things, you end up assigning pleasure to those things, and therefore you'll get a dopamine hit when you think about those things, which will then motivate you to go and do them. So I'm trying to find different ways of explaining how dopamine works so that you can see how it fits into your own life. What do you get pleasure from? And when do you find yourself getting motivated to do those things? So when we get tired and we're done for the day, normally our dopamine stores are depleted quite a lot, and we do default to those quick fixes. And do you know what? Sometimes at the end of the day, with a bit of Netflix or a bit of a flick through Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, no, is not going to hurt you. But if you do that stuff at the beginning of the day, you're ruining all of your motivation to do the tough stuff, like going to the gym, like having an ice bath, like doing a tough task that you should have done that requires a lot of brain power. So if you're going to use the quick fixes, use them more at the end of the day than the beginning of the day. So this just brings us back to the rhythm and the cycle that we're in. We're in the neurological rhythm. The neurological rhythm is all about rewiring your brain to be motivated and get the right stimulus for what it is that you're doing. And this is quite nicely in the clean part, the clean cycle of the turn back time machine. Because when you rewire your brain, you're cleaning out all those neurological pathways to break up the ones that are damaging to you at the beginning of the day, when you just sit there and scroll through your phone, or you get caffeine hit after caffeine hit. You've got to disengage those negative connections and re-engage the positive ones, like finding pleasure from going to the gym, finding pleasure from completing hard tasks, finding pleasure from spending time with family or going on a long walk in nature. Yes, those things take harder. Yes, those things take more effort. However, they have a much, much, much longer term benefit. And therefore, you have to get pleasure from the delayed gratification of it. So if you could rewire your brain to get pleasure from more of the delayed gratification things, you will find yourself getting dopamine from more positive sources rather than the quick fixes. And dopamine works best when you've had to put effort into something. In this modern world, we don't want to put effort into anything, but dopamine responds in its most positive way, and it's managed more effectively when you attach it to things that require effort. And I think that's a really good way to position it. But I've written something down here, and your brain needs cycles of focus, effort, and reward. Now, if we're constantly in focus, then we never get the reward. If we're constantly in effort, we burn ourselves out. And if we're constantly in reward, we don't know what pleasure is anymore. And that's why if we're constantly rewarding ourselves with stimulants and social media scrolling, it becomes less and less pleasurable. So that's why we have to go through these constant cycles of focus, cycles of effort, and cycles of reward, so that our neurological pathways and dopamine and motivation to go and do something are at its most effective. So hopefully that makes sense to you. I'm trying again to explain it in lots of different ways so that you can see how it relates to your life. But this focus, effort, reward cycle is really important, because what that does is it realigns how your brain ticks over. And the better your brain releases certain hormones, the more engaged and motivated you're going to be to do the hard stuff that is going to get you the long-term amount of pleasure rather than the short-term quick fixes. And I think if you can just identify which ones are your short-term quick fixes and which are your long-term pleasures, you can then start to realign how your brain is wired. And just remember, your rhythms run your life, so master them. This is why we are running the Turn Back Time Machine in rhythms, cycles, and hormones. Remember, 3 cycles, 6 primal rhythms, and 12 hormones. That's it. That's how our body runs. And if we can master them, we can reverse our age. So just a couple notes that I made, which I think is really important to highlight. So to get effective management of your dopamine drivers, firstly, your environment needs to be right. So if you're constantly getting distracted by notification and things in your environment that are going to pull you away from what you know you need to do, that is going to inhibit your dopamine massively, because you're going to get distracted onto other things. So I've got down here, phones out of sight, notifications off, only one task visible at a time. You want to focus on one thing until you're successful. So while we can multitask as human beings, when it comes to focused tasks, you only focus on one thing at a time. So just make sure you keep that right. The other thing is your behavior. So reward must follow effort. There's no effort to going on your phone, taking a pill, drinking a coffee, having a pint. There's no effort to that. But there is in completing a gym session or completing a hard task. So rewire your behavior so that reward can only come after effort. The other thing with behavior is you've got to get progress before pleasure. So while there needs to be effort before reward, you need to think of progress before pleasure as well. And then lastly, it's more of an identity shift. So you need to change what you identify as in terms of where you get pleasure from. So if you can change the things that you get pleasure from to be long-term positive things that are going to enhance your life, reverse your age, if you focus on those things and getting pleasure from those, then you'll start to see how the other things don't actually bring you pleasure. The instant pleasure has a longer term negative impact. So there isn't really a negative impact from the longer term pleasure stuff. It just takes a bit more time to get to the pleasure. So as long as you're happy to delay that gratification, there's no negative impact to the positive stuff. There is only a slight delay before you get to the pleasure. So all you're doing, and this is the identity shift, is changing the instant gratification and pleasure straight away to a little bit longer wait for the pleasure, but the pleasure lasting a hell of a lot longer. a lifetime for that matter, if it becomes your behaviors. So that's the identity and behavioral shift that you need to make to be able to rewire your brain so that your dopamine and your neurological rhythm can work properly. So what will you get as a result from this? So I've got a few things written down here. Your focus lasts longer. You got less urge to check your phone, which is going to be really good. You get satisfaction from making progress in the gym, in work, in family, friends, relationship. You have this calm confidence that you just know what to do and when to do it. You got no worries. And then lastly, I've got written down here, there's much less mental noise. And that's what we're all aiming for. That's what dopamine, not dopamine in general, but the right use of dopamine, the right release of dopamine can give you. So that's it. That's dopamine. The drive to get something done, the motivation of the pursuit. So I do love dopamine, and dopamine, if used properly, can make you unstoppable as a human being. Now, there's loads of tools that you can download on book resources, drcarnivoreentrepreneur.com. So feel free to go on there, put your details in, download loads of stuff. Obviously, subscribe to the show, share this episode with anyone that you think would benefit from it. And if you haven't heard any previous hormone episodes, go back and look at the ones from the fix cycle, because we've just started clean and the neurological rhythm. This has been dopamine. So if you want to go and revisit the other ones, feel free to do so. But download the toolkit, subscribe and share this with who you like. Remember, longevity is the highest form of providing. So I'm really looking forward to seeing everyone on the next episode. So just remember, be young, be happy, and be free, people.